Okay, well, thank you for coming. I'm really excited to be with you for the next 3 weeks. So I hope this week goes well so that you're happy to have me back for the next 2 weeks because I'll be here for a while. You're not going to get rid of me yet. Let me tell you a little bit about how we're going to go the next 3 weeks. So this week, I'm really going to talk more about a framework for thinking about how we think about religions other than our own, or some frameworks, I should say. And then in the next 2 weeks, we'll kind of do a little more exploration of some different religious practices and religious traditions. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm calling it an appreciative understanding of the world's religions. So let's first start with, and I got to make sure even though I teach and have to use a computer all the time, that doesn't always seem to work for me sometimes. So let's talk about why. Why would we want to cover this topic? I was really excited when Connie asked me to come and do this for you, but let's talk about why we might want to cover it. So I have two pictures up here. The first picture over here is of the Tree of Life Synagogue. I don't know if you remember this. In 2018, a shooter went into Tree of Life Synagogue and shot 11 worshipers during a service. This one's much more recent. Unfortunately, this is from less than a month ago. This is a little boy, 6 years old, and I have his name written down. His name is Wadia Al-Fayoude, 6-year-old boy in Chicago, Muslim boy who was stabbed by his landlord and killed because he was Muslim. Okay, so I feel like I'm starting on this negative tone, but what I want to say is that these are extreme examples of what happens when we don't have a kind of an appreciative understanding of people who have different religious practices than our own. When that doesn't happen, it eventually devolves into things that are not so good, things that are violent sometimes, but some ways that are less than violent, but still aren't helpful to other people in the world. So I want to say that's why I think this is really important. I'm really excited that you've asked me to come here to talk about this, because I think it's important for all of us to become more knowledgeable about the different religions of the world and become more appreciative of them as well. So let me start with a few. Well, I'll first give you the overview of the presentation. Here's what we're going to cover in the presentation here. First, I'm going to start with some disclaimers. Okay, I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. We're going to talk about the science of interfaith cooperation. We're going to talk about how we develop this appreciative approach to thinking about world religions. I'm going to use an analogy of a bridge. We're going to talk about how to understand the faith of others, a pluralist continuum. And then I'm going to talk about one particular example of a pluralist whose name is Ibu Patel, who's a Muslim American. So let's start with my disclaimers, okay? So a couple things I want to say first of all. First of all, what I want to say is that religious diversity, when I was growing up, I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church. Religious diversity to me was when Italian Catholics and Irish Catholics worshiped together in the same parish, okay? So maybe you can relate to that. I don't know what this parish was originally, but Norwegians and Swedes, or Danes and Norwegians, I'm not sure, but those divisions, right? Those divisions by ethnic group, well, that was religious diversity when they could come together, right? But I would say that, I'm overstating it a little bit, because when I think about growing up, I can think about how I grew up actually in New York State. I'm not from Minnesota originally. I remember going sometimes with my friends who were not Catholic, who were Protestant, to their Wednesday night services, sometimes to Vacation Bible School. I also remember a couple times going to the bar mitzvahs of some family friends for their sons. So I had a little bit of an inkling of kind of understanding that there were religions different than my own when I was growing up. But I would also say I did not meet a person who was Muslim well into adulthood. I didn't attend a service that was not either Christian or Jewish well into adulthood. So I would say I had a lot of learning to do as well. So I didn't start out with this perspective right away. I'd also say that when I came to Augsburg, my specialty of what I was going to teach there wasn't comparative religions, which is what I'm doing here. It was theological ethics, specifically Christian ethics. So I was really trained more as a Christian theologian, okay? But over the years, as I've been teaching more and more and getting more and more interested in what other religions have to offer, I've really had to educate myself through both book knowledge, but also meeting people who have taught me a great deal about other religions. So that's where I come from. I want to make it clear that I'm not an expert in that way. And what I want to also share with you is I'm not going to give you the perspective on how to appreciate world religions. I'm going to give you my perspective, okay? And there's going to be people who have different perspectives, but I hope that you will at least take my perspective into consideration, okay? Any questions so far? And I want this to be a dialogue. If you have questions or comments that you want to make as we're going through, please feel free to jump in. We're good so far? Okay. Okay. So, I don't know what happens when it... Oh, it came up. Okay, good. Okay. So let me talk about this idea of the science of interfaith cooperation. So this person I was talking about, Ibu Patel, who we'll talk a little bit more about later, he talks about this idea about the science of interfaith cooperation. And this was actually based on some sociological research that was done. And it talked about this. This triangle talks about how there are three ways that we can come to appreciate a tradition that's other than our own, okay? And the three ways kind of support each other. So the first way I want to talk about is knowledge. So knowledge would be positive, appreciative, what I mean, accurate understanding about a religion. So kind of educating oneself about what do I really need to know about a religion and what's accurate information about a religion, because there's a lot of inaccurate information, as we know, out there about different religions. Relationships is the next thing here. Relationships with real people from that traditions, relationships that reveal the diversity of that tradition. As we know, as Christians, there's many different ways that people are Christian, right? Sometimes when we think about other religions, we don't give them that same latitude. We don't think that there's many different ways that people can be Jewish. There's many different ways that people can be Muslim. There's many different ways that people can be Buddhist, and so forth, okay? So to kind of understand, by having various relationships, that there's many different ways that people inhabit those different religious traditions. And then finally, attitudes. So attitudes are generous, positive opinions about particular religions. So kind of entering into thinking about other religions with a generous attitude. You're going to kind of have a generous and look for what you see as best in that religion. How you would want people to look at your own faith. You'd want people to look at your own faith in a generous way. The triangle can also be seen as like a cycle where each side is supporting and informing the other three. So for example, you can have a combination of relationships and knowledge that can lead to attitudes. So here's an interesting statistic. 32% of people who know a Muslim 32% of people who do not know a Muslim express favorable views towards the community. So only a third of people who don't know a Muslim say, I have positive views about Muslims. But people who know a Muslim, 52% of them have positive views about Muslims, okay? So when we combine knowledge with relationships, we have a more positive view about that, okay? And then I think when we have relationships with people from different faith backgrounds, sometimes that leads us to want to have more knowledge. We meet someone, we learn a little bit about them, and they're like, I want to read more about what this religion really means, okay? So let me talk about this bridge analogy, okay? So let's think about spirituality or one's connection to one's religious tradition as a bridge, okay? I love this bridge picture. I think it's from somewhere in Ireland. It's a beautiful picture. The purpose of a bridge is to get you from one place to another, okay? But bridges have differing materials. Some bridges are made out of rope, some are wood, some are brick or stone, some are steel. I live actually 3 blocks from the Mississippi, so I see all sorts of bridges made in all sorts of different ways. You here live very close to the Mississippi as well. You've probably seen many bridges as well. They have differing designs, arches, suspension bridge, swinging bridge. So each kind of spirituality, each kind of religious tradition offers a kind of passage, okay? And let's think about that. What's the passage? The passage would be to something, something that can be the divine, God. It can be self-transcendence. Maybe some religious traditions say it's just something beyond myself. I don't know what that is. It can be to personal and social well-being. It can be to justice for all people. Those can all be things that spirituality is trying to get you to. So spirituality, this idea here, there's an ethical dimension to spirituality, okay? And what I'd say about this is spiritual traditions, and I think any spiritual tradition that is kind of worth its salt would say that it's not just about my relationship with the divine, it's about my relationship with other people, okay? To put it in Lutheran terms, it's about service to the neighbor, right? That would be a good way that Luther would talk about it. And so we need to think about that. Paul Knitter, who's a theologian on comparative religions, he says, the most urgent form of interreligious encounter today is the ethical dialogue among the religions. How do religions think about how they live in the world together? How do we inhabit this world together? How do we reduce violence and bring more peace in the world? To put it another way, again, if we take our religion seriously, we take the call to serve the neighbor seriously, but not the abstract neighbor, but rather the neighbor who may hold a very different spiritual or philosophical tradition than our own. How do we serve that neighbor as well, not just the neighbor who is the one that we know, okay? So from here, thank you, I want to think about this idea about how do we then understand the religious faith of others? Or how do we understand the different bridges that other religions have built? And in order to think about this, I want to talk about another scholar of comparative religions, Diana Eck. Diana Eck is a professor at Harvard University. This is one of her books that I particularly like called Encountering God. It's about her experience as a Christian going and working in India, and really what she's come to understand about comparing Christianity and Hinduism specifically is what she talks about. But in this book, she kind of unpacks this idea about a framework for thinking about how different people understand how their religious faith relates to the faith of others. So I'm going to walk you through a continuum of how she thinks about this. So here's the continuum. So the continuum has 5 different positions on it. On this end of the continuum, we have hard exclusivism and nihilistic relativism. And I'll talk about each of these, but these two exist together on this end of the spectrum. On the other end is something called committed pluralism and uncommitted relativism. And then the middle is something called inclusivism. Okay, so let me walk you through each one. And if you have questions, I can answer those as well. So let's start with hard exclusivism. You're doing a great job. Thank you very much. Oh, nihilist. Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. You're keeping me in line, too. That's important. Okay, so let's talk about nihilistic relativism. So nihilism is a philosophy that says nothing has meaning, okay? So nihilistic relativism, or a nihilistic relativist in relationship to religion, would say, denies that there's any truth in religion, okay? Denies that there's any truth in religion. And it says the impossibility of universalizing any one truth claim suggests the emptiness of all truth claims. So in other words, if we can't prove that any religion is particularly true, they all must be false, okay? So this is a very extreme form of those folks who are atheists, who have no belief in any religion at all. But folks who are atheists doesn't necessarily mean that they believe that there can be no truth that can come from religion. This is a very extreme form of this, to say that no truth can come from religion at all, okay? The next one, hard exclusivism, thank you. Hard exclusivism, other terms that sometimes you might hear that are the same as hard exclusivism would be triumphalism, religious chauvinism, or religious totalitarianism, okay? So this would say revelation about God can come only through one particular religion. Guess which religion that is? It's my religion, of course, right? Yeah, so it says, there are no meaningful similarities between my religion, the correct one, and other world religions, okay? I have the only correct religion, all the rest of them are wrong, okay? Now, we certainly can think about this in the Christian tradition, right? We can think about folks who are Christian exclusivists who think this way, but other religions have exclusivist tendencies. Every religion has an exclusivist tendency to it. Folks who think that their religion is the only one that could ever have any religious truth to it, okay? Now, if you remember back to the continuum that I showed you, remember I had nihilistic, I'm going to treat you like my students in my class now, see if you're paying attention. I had nihilistic relativism and hard exclusivism together on one end of the spectrum. Can you think about what they share in common? What do hard exclusivism and nihilistic relativism share in common? Okay, you're just like my students. No one's going to raise their hand. Go ahead.
Well, one believes no truth, and the other one believes the only truth that's true is my truth. So everybody else doesn't have truth.
Exactly. So both of them are saying, basically, I've got the right answer, right? It's all about me. I've got the right answer. Some are saying the right answer is there's no religious truth. The other one is saying the right answer is there's only my religious truth. So they exist at the same end of the spectrum because they believe the same thing. Okay, does that make sense to everyone? Great. Good group. Good students. Thank you. Good job. Okay, let's go to the middle position then. So the middle position is called inclusivism. Another term for this is soft exclusivism. I'll go back to that. This says, revelation about God can come from outside my religion, but they are incomplete. So other religions don't have the complete picture. My religion does have the complete picture. So my religion is the fulfillment of all other religions directly or indirectly. Okay? This leads to something that's called theological supersessionism. And this would be a belief in a progression in the monotheistic tradition. So basically, it's the idea that Christianity completes Judaism and Islam completes Christianity. Okay, you're kind of saying, we're the final answer. These people had they get partial credit, we get full credit, okay, for what we have. Okay, go to the next slide, thanks. So let me give you some examples of this, okay, kind of historically. So first of all, C.S. Lewis, you all know who C.S. Lewis is, right? Wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, wonderful kids' books that I read to my children. He's also written some wonderful theology books that I've read. Actually, I took a course in college that was a whole seminar on just C.S. Lewis's writing, which was really a wonderful seminar. So C.S. Lewis said, you know, any person who says a prayer authentically, they're really praying to Jesus Christ. Okay, it doesn't matter what religion they're in. If they say an authentic prayer, they're praying to Jesus Christ. So basically, he's saying other religions, they can have something authentic about their religion because it really is going back to the same religion that I have. It's all kind of funneled into Christianity. Okay, so he's including people who are non-Christian into his Christianity. Okay. Karl Rahner was a theologian, German theologian from the 1960s, and he had this idea of kind of very similar to C.S. Lewis of one can be an anonymous Christian. One can be a Christian without even knowing they're a Christian because of the way they live their life and what their beliefs are. So someone who is a Muslim or a Hindu or a Jew or a Buddhist, they could be a Christian even though they don't know they're a Christian. Okay. Finally, in Vatican II, so in my tradition, Roman Catholicism, in Vatican II, the big council of the church that happened in the 60s, 1962 to 1965, there was a famous document that came out that actually was a watershed document at the time. So we're talking like 80 years ago now. Wow, I'm feeling old all of a sudden. The decree, right, is that no, not 80 years. I'm 60 years, thank you. I can't do the math, I'm not a math, okay. 60 years ago. And this document was called Nostra Aetate. Okay, all the Vatican documents have a Latin name to them, but it was, in English, it was called the Decree on Non-Christian Religions. And this was a watershed moment because for the first time, the Catholic Church said, you know what? Other religions can reflect a ray of truth. Okay? It wasn't saying other religions are completely true, but it was saying other religions can reflect a ray of truth. And as much as they kind of come close to what Christianity teaches. Okay, so it was a big moment, but again, it was not saying other religions have just as much validity as my religion, is saying other religions have a part of the truth. Okay? Okay, so let's keep going on now to the next end of the continuum. So I had two things at the other end of the continuum. The first one is called committed pluralism. Okay, so committed pluralism would say this: the multiplicity of religions can reflect the many-sidedness of God and that God cannot be limited. So the reason why there's so many religions is because God is so vast and God cannot be contained by our understanding of religion. Now, what's interesting about this, if you go back and read mystical literature, Christian mystical literature from centuries past, some of my favorite writers were from the Middle Ages. Especially there's a whole group of mystics who are called the Rhineland mystics, who are these mystics from Germany. And they had this idea of what's called apophatic mysticism, the idea that God cannot be boxed in by our images of God. God is greater than any image that we can give of God. And if we think that God is particularly that image, we've lost the idea of what God really is. We have to understand God is vast and beyond our understanding. And anything we say about God is just kind of an approximation of trying to understand who God is. Okay? So this one is really referencing this idea. God cannot be limited, so we need to let God be God. And God's going to show up in whatever way God is going to show up, and we shouldn't think that we can limit God. Does that make sense to everyone? So this area of committed pluralism talks about dialogue with other religions, starts, though, from a commitment to my own particular religion. Okay? And there's a couple goals in dialogue. The first goal is to find places within each tradition to meet another in mutual respect. Okay, so how do you find places where you can have some crossover, some connection with what other religions think? And then the second goal of dialogue is to develop ways of speaking and listening for mutual self-understanding, standing, and mutual transformation. So this idea of committed pluralism is saying, you know what? When I try to dialogue with the other, I'm not trying to become the other. In fact, I'm trying to become deeper of who I am. Okay, that's how the dialogue happens. And actually, often folks who are in dialogue with other religions would say, it makes me understand my religion more deeply because I have to think about why do I believe this and not what that other person believes. Okay? So a committed pluralist then isn't turning away from their religious tradition, they're actually turning more deeper into the religious tradition by acknowledging what other religious traditions can bring and enrich in their own tradition. Okay, then the last one is uncommitted pluralism. Sometimes it's called uncommitted relativism. So this would say, every religion or belief system is more or less true, so I don't give my heart to anything in particular. Kind of like the idea of, oh, it's all the same. All religions are the same, okay? So I don't give myself to anything in particular. The critique of this would be, the person who's the uncommitted pluralist is a little bit like the perpetual shopper. They're always looking for the next best thing. Oh, that's okay. Can you go back? I think if you go backspace. There we go, okay. They're always looking for the next best thing. They're not committing themselves to anything in particular, so there's no real core from which to dialogue from if you don't have any kind of commitment that you're starting with, okay? So this idea then, the critique of this is that it's a little bit relativistic. It's a little bit like not rooting yourself in something. And really the idea of committed pluralism is that you're committing yourself, you're rooting yourself, you're firmly planting yourself in your own tradition as you try to reach out to other traditions, okay? So that's the difference between the two of them. Does this make sense to everyone so far? Great. Okay, so let me talk about, you can go to the next one now, thanks. So I want to talk about, give you one example of a committed pluralist to kind of understand how does someone do this? How does someone kind of take their own faith and be firmly rooted in it, but then find themselves able to dialogue and find truth and beauty in other traditions as well. So I want to talk about someone named Eboo Patel. So Eboo Patel, this is his memoir he wrote called Acts of Faith, the story of a Muslim and the struggle for the soul of a generation. And his story is really about growing up in the United States, growing up in a suburb of Chicago, and kind of his experience of kind of growing up Muslim in the United States, but also his experience of how he interacted with other people and how that helped him understand his own tradition better. He started an organization originally called the Interfaith Youth Corps. Now it's called Interfaith America. And it does a lot of work trying to develop interfaith cooperation, both on college campuses, but also in the wider community. He works with businesses, he works with nonprofits to try to develop this idea of interfaith understanding. So what I want to start with is I actually want to play for you an audio essay that he wrote. So it's only a couple minutes, but I think it gives you a good starting point for understanding how he began thinking about this idea of interfaith cooperation. And this is from, I don't know if anyone remembers a few years ago, if any of you listened to public radio, a few years ago they had this series called This I Believe. And people would come on the radio and they'd give like a 2 or 3 minute audio essay about something that they held firm and believed in, a value, an experience, that kind of a thing. They were really wonderful different essays. They compiled them all into a book, actually, that I have that's all these different essays. But it's great to listen to them, too. And they have a whole website online that you can go to, this I Believe website, where you can listen to all the archives of all the past essays. So I'm going to play this one for you. This is about his experience of growing up, and we'll listen to it, and then we'll see, talk a little bit about it. Great. Just got to say, yeah. Great. Thank you. And then oops. There we go.
Eboo Patel's beliefs were confirmed in a moment he's not proud of. His efforts since then have been to redeem that moment by honoring what he believes with action. Here is Eboo Patel with his essay, For This I Believe, which begins, as he says, the way Muslims begin most things, with a prayer. It translates, in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I am an American Muslim. I believe in pluralism. In the Holy Quran, God tells us, I created you into diverse nations and tribes that you may come to know one another. I believe America is humanity's best opportunity to make God's wish that we come to know one another a reality. In my office hangs Norman Rockwell's illustration, Freedom of Worship. A Muslim holding a Quran stands near a Catholic woman fingering her rosary. Other characters have their hands folded in prayer and their eyes filled with piety. They stand shoulder to shoulder, facing the same direction, comfortable with the presence of one another, and yet apart. It is a vivid depiction of a group living in peace with its diversity, yet not exploring it. We live in a world where the forces that seek to divide us are strong. To overcome them, we must do more than simply stand next to one another in silence. I attended high school in the western suburbs of Chicago. The group I ate lunch with included a Jew, a Mormon, a Hindu, a Catholic, and a Lutheran. We were all devout to a degree, but we almost never talked about religion. Somebody would announce at the table that they couldn't eat a certain kind of food, or any food at all, for a period of time. We all knew religion hovered behind this, but nobody ever offered any explanation deeper than, my mom said, and nobody ever asked for one. A few years after we graduated, my Jewish friend from the lunchroom reminded me of an experience we both wish had never happened. A group of thugs in our high school had taken to scrawling anti-Semitic slurs on classroom desks and shouting them in the hallway. I did not confront them. I did not comfort my Jewish friend. Instead, I averted my eyes from their bigotry, and I avoided the eyes of my friend, because I couldn't stand to face him. My friend told me he feared coming to school those days, and he felt abandoned as he watched his close friends do nothing. Hearing him tell me of his suffering and my complicity is the single most humiliating experience of my life. My friend needed more than my silent presence at the lunch table. I realize now that to believe in pluralism means I need the courage to act on it. Action is what separates a belief from an opinion. Beliefs are imprinted through actions. In the words of the American poet Gwendolyn Brooks, we are each other's business. We are each other's harvest. We are each other's magnitude and bond. I cannot go back in time and take away the suffering of my Jewish friend, but through action, I can prevent it from happening to others.
Eboo Patel with his essay, For This I Believe. Patel is the founder and executive director of the Interfaith Youth Corps, a Chicago-based organization fostering the international interfaith youth movement.
Great. Thank you. So what do you hear? What do you hear in that essay? What do you hear in that essay about how he came to his understanding of why pluralism was so important? Anybody have a thought about that?
The thing that struck me the most was the fact that he felt compassion and then just anybody didn't act. So the key is action.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you're a good student. You're a very good student. No, excellent. You get a star. Excellent. The idea that it's not just about, we can hold these very strong beliefs, but if we don't act on those beliefs, especially in those pivotal moments and kind of those, actually, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, you probably have heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor, he talks about we have places of responsibility where we can cooperate with God in doing good, and sometimes we don't act when those places are presented to us, and that's exactly what happened to him. Any other thoughts about this?
We're going to get to how we do the action, aren't we?
Yes, exactly. Not in this session. Not in this session, but we'll get to it. Okay, yeah. I got to keep you, pugging along for the next weeks. So the other thing I'd want to say is sometimes we learn most about what we believe in our failures. Would you agree with that? Like sometimes it's when we fail that we actually learn most. And what I appreciate about this essay is he's not talking about this is how I created this wonderful pluralistic environment. He said, this is how in that moment when I had a place of responsibility, when I could have done something, I didn't. And that sticks with me that I need to then think about that for the future. Okay, so I always like starting with this, and I use this with my students a lot because they can relate to it as formerly high school students so recently, to think that it's all about a growth process, right? And it takes time to grow into these ideas. We don't come out of the head of Zeus fully formed, right? We have to kind of keep growing and growing wherever we're starting from. So I think this is a good example of this was his starting point, and this kind of led him on this path. Okay, so what happens on Eboo Patel's path that I think is really interesting in terms of how he becomes this person who is this exemplar of a committed pluralist is he goes to college at the University of Illinois, and while he's in college, he's introduced actually to someone who is a Christian. Let's go to the next slide. So he's introduced to, through these friends, he ends up going to what's called a Catholic worker house. I don't know if you know who Dorothy Day is. Dorothy Day was a pacifist, anarchist. Eventually, she became a committed Catholic, but she initially was this kind of political radical who was involved in all these different movements in the early 20th century, and then she converted to Catholicism. She started this movement called the Catholic Worker Movement, which founded these houses of hospitality for poor and homeless people, okay? Serving during the Depression is when she started, okay? And he started volunteering at this Catholic worker house, and he's like, there's something to this. There's something here. This isn't, Islam, but there's something to this. And this is what he took from Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day is from her autobiography, The Long Loneliness. She said, I wanted, though I did not know it then, a synthesis. I wanted life, and I wanted an abundant life, and I wanted it for others too. So this was the impulse that she found that led her to want to be part of a religious tradition. And at the time, it was the Catholic religious tradition that she chose. She also said this. She said, the truth is the truth and proceeds from the Holy Ghost, no matter whose lips it comes, from whose lips it comes. So in other words, truth is everywhere. The Holy Ghost, the Holy Spirit is everywhere, and truth is going to come from all sorts of different people, all sorts of different traditions, and we just have to accept the truth when it comes to us. Okay, so he heard this vision that was about wanting something abundant for all people, and this kind of pluralist vision of saying we have to kind of think how all people are going to have this truth that's going to come from them. And this is what he said later about how he felt about this. He said, here was what I had been searching for so long, a vision of radical equality. All human beings living the abundant life that could be achieved through both a direct service approach and a change of system politics. So he saw it as Dorothy Day, you serve the homeless directly, you serve the neighbor, but then also you try to change the system to make it more loving towards the neighbor as well, is what she wanted to do. So on this journey then, he found there were other guides, other folks who led him to some things to think about how he could kind of still remain this committed Muslim. So at this point in his life when he's in college, he's kind of like, do I really want to practice Islam or not? I'm not really sure. But seeing Dorothy Day really moved him to do that. And so then he goes on a trip to India, where his family's originally from, and he visits the Dalai Lama. He visits the Dalai Lama in India. The Dalai Lama, if you don't know, is the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism. And this is what the Dalai Lama said to him. The Dalai Lama said to him, religions must be in dialogue, but even more, they must come together to serve others. Service is most important, and finding common values between religions. And if you study the other religions, you must learn more about your own and believe more in your own. So he's not saying, you should study other religions and then you should become those religions. He's saying, no, you study other religions and then what you do is you learn more about your own and you believe more in your own. Other religions should lead you back to this idea about how you're rooted in your own religion, okay, and enrich that rootedness in your own religion. So again, he's saying, be a committed pluralist. Find ways to dialogue with other religions, but commit yourself to your own religion. And then finally, he talks about how his reading of the life of Gandhi also led him down the same path, okay? While he was in India, he started reading about Gandhi as well. And this is something that Gandhi said. The tradition you are born into is your home. But as Gandhi once wrote, it should be a home with the windows open so that the winds of other traditions can blow through and bring their unique oxygen. It's good to have wings, he said, but you should have roots too. Okay, so this idea that you should be rooted in a particular tradition, but you can have wings to kind of let those other traditions come in and be there with your own. Okay, so this is the framework I wanted to give you to think about. And then what we're going to do over the next couple weeks is we're going to start to unpack what different religions might have to offer, and then get to this idea about how do we act on that? What can we do to kind of make those beliefs, if we believe in this idea that we can be enriched by other traditions, how do we act on that and kind of move forward? So let me open it up for any kind of questions then about anything that I've presented so far that I can answer for you. Yes?
What's the relationship between committed pluralism and universalism?
Ah, that's an interesting question. So are you thinking along the lines of like Unitarian Universalism, that kind of?
Yeah.
So,
Or all, yeah.
like that
All religions have a path to God, or not have a path to God, but provides salvation or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, again, different, so the idea of universal salvation is really what you're thinking about, or along those lines.
Yeah.
You know, and I would say different religious traditions, even within Christianity, would have different ideas about the whole idea of universal salvation. Is universal salvation possible? Some would say, no, unless very specifically you confess the name of Jesus, there's no way that salvation is possible. Other religious traditions would fall in the end of saying, it's possible, we don't know exactly how, but there might be a possibility for doing this. So I think, let me tell you what Eboo Patel would say. Eboo Patel would say, you can dialogue with people whose traditions are different than your own, but there also are going to be some questions that you're never going to agree on, and you accept the disagreement. Okay, so for example, questions of salvation can fall outside the realm of agreement. It doesn't mean because someone is a committed Muslim pluralist and a committed Christian pluralist that they agree on the questions of salvation, but it means they hang in there for the dialogue about those things. Okay, so dialogue doesn't necessarily mean agreement, I guess is what I would say.
Theology, even.
Yeah, or theology. It doesn't mean you share a common theology. Yes, that's a great way to put it as well. That's a really great question, though. Other questions or comments? You're acting just like my students again. This is doesn't change. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Well, I think we'll stop there then.
All right. Well, next week, like we said, there's donuts in here, coffee in here, so just come on in and join us. Don't have to wait in that long line, and we'll continue the conversation next week. Again, what are you going to talk about?
So next week we're going to start unpacking, talking about different religions. So we'll see what we can get through next week, and then we'll go into the next week as well. So the next 2 weeks will kind of be very similar to each other in that we'll be working on talking about different religions and what are some things we can glean from them that could help us in our own commitment.
So invite others because it's all still good. Ellen, do you have something? Oh, we're going to clap.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.